Indeed. I too am thankful to the Minister for the help to given us, and indeed the Taoiseach as being in charge of defence forces and the briefings he's given us. Our first thoughts today must be with our officers serving abroad, serving in different parts of the world in a noble cause of peacekeeping duties, unable to get home or possibly getting home will be greatly diminished. Many of them due to come home in the near future to their families and loved ones, and they have the added worry of worrying about themselves and worrying about their family at home, and their families at home worrying about themselves. And Minister, it's a pity that it took something like this to have you, and indeed want to be critical of the overall scheme, to recognise and indeed to rightly recognise the prowess and the honour and the prestige that her army have had over the decades, serving all over the world but above all at home, and to have it in such a depleted state at this point in time is shameful. Shameful for this government and the previous governments, and they were treated literally with disdain, and they pleaded and begged us. They couldn't protest, as you know, but they did appeal and appeal and appeal, and because of that, and to see some of our naval ships taken off in recent times because of lack of personnel, some threats to our Air Corps, and threats to even our air and rescue recovery helicopters because of a fleeing of pilots and highly trained personnel. I think that was shameful. Look, it is good now to see the naval ships being ushered up to our ports and being used as test centres and hopefully treatment centres, and indeed it's excellent to have the civil defence and all the volunteers, and I've mentioned civil defence every time I speak because they are just unbelievable in what they do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis when they're called on, and called on very, very often, as we know. It's great to see that the former enlisted soldiers, even many of them having the bad taste, having the bad recognition, having the bad wages, having the bad lack of recognition by the government of their roles, that now they are interested in returning, and it will be good when you get it up on military.ie. But what is the delay in getting it up for people that want to return, Minister? We're a couple of weeks into the crisis now, and you told us an hour ago, if I'm rightly so, that, or 40 minutes ago, that it would be up by the weekend. As I said, it's also members of the RDF and Reserve. And the FCA, as I knew them, were a very proud record. And then it was changed, the name changed, but it didn't give many better conditions. But I want to salute them as well, because they had given, I know many of the officers, and many of them have gone to their eternal reward. And the training that afforded to young people as well, young men and women over the decades that wanted to enlist in the FCA and get fabulous training in, first of all, service to the country and a sense of pride, but also physical training, and indeed the training of firearms and the training of many, many areas of rescue, and indeed in a supportive role for our Garda Síochána. They were a brilliant organisation all over the years, and indeed I remember some colleagues of mine, or school friends of mine, who went in there as young men and stayed there until they were forced to retire at the retirement age from the army. The army cadets and the recruits, and indeed the apprenticeships, they must be remunerated. Can't expect them to be brought in and been paid a pittance to do the work. They want to do the work, that's why they joined up. They are willing and ready and able to do it, but they must be rewarded financially to some extent, especially. They just can't be the bottom rung of the ladder and be expected to do it and don't get the support. So that's very important, because we need to be able to, after this crisis passes, and I believe it will pass with the support of the people, and we're all in it together. And we must ensure that the army gets its rightful treatment. And no disrespect to you, Minister, yourself, but I believe that there should be a full minister, as used to be in the past, for defence, because our defence forces are very important. They must also be supplied with PPE equipment. They can't be expected to be short on that either, because, as I said, they will be in many, many different situations and aspects of it. And hopefully, with us working together, we won't see the scenes that we have seen in Spain and in Italy, with the army trucks carrying away the coffins to be cremated. That would be unthinkable. And so we have some time here in hand, but that is why, Minister, Minister, I want to ask you, why is the delay in putting up the information on army.ie for people who want to go back? So as I said, our thoughts and prayers are with our soldiers facing this with another frontline officer, but are with our officers that are abroad serving the United Nations in different parts of the world. Good morning.
First of all, I want to thank all the deputies who have contributed to the debate today, and I would ask for your indulgence, please, as there have been a lot of issues raised, and I will try to respond to as many as I can. But for those that I don't address, there will be an opportunity for the relevant ministers to discuss them at committee stage. Just in terms of money lending, which I know was raised earlier today, I share the concerns already expressed about increased reliance on money lending during the crisis, and I would strongly encourage people to consider their local credit union and to approach MABs if they find themselves in financial difficulty. I'd also point out that the Central Bank's Code of Conduct for licensed money lenders prohibits unsolicited contact or cold calling except in certain limited circumstances. And to use a familiar phrase, my advice to people is to keep the wolves from the door and go to your local credit union whom you know that you can trust. Regarding insurance issues in relation to business interruption insurance and regarding a claim in relation to loss of earnings, because of closure due to COVID-19 will depend on the specifics of their policy. However, as a general rule, I believe that insurers should not attempt to reject claims on the basis of interpreting policies to their own advantage. I believe that where businesses have had to close on the basis of advice or a direction to close by the government, and their insurance policy covers such a scenario, that insurers should engage with those businesses honestly, fairly and professionally to honour those elements of the policies covered. Where a policy states that a claim can be made when a business has closed as a result of a government direction because of a general notifiable infectious disease, I believe that government advice to close a business amounts to the same thing. I believe that insurers should not try to distinguish between these situations where there is a general infectious disease provision in a policy in order to avoid payment of claims. In this regard, I believe the government's direction to childcare providers and its advice to pubs and clubs to close is sufficient for those businesses to be able to make a claim on their insurance where the appropriate business interruption cover is in place. The Central Bank has issued a questionnaire to the main providers of business interruption insurance in Ireland. Firms were required to provide the number of policies, the aggregate sums insured for business interruption and the potential level of cover for COVID-19 related claims. The Bank is currently analysing the returns and will update Department of Finance officials as soon as they can. And I also understand that the Central Bank is to write to the insurance industry, setting out how it expects insurance firms to handle the settlement of claims arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. The regulator's view is that firms must ensure that all claims are appropriately assessed, and where there is insurance cover in place, that claims are accepted and paid. In relation to the social protection measures, I know some deputies queried whether the COVID pandemic unemployment payment, which is known as COVID PUP, should be payable to the people returning from Canada, Australia and other countries. The COVID PUP is deliberately targeted at people who have been living and working in Ireland at the time the pandemic struck. It is directed at people who lost all employment and who are living here. People returning to Ireland who cannot find work should apply for job seekers payment, and the habitual residency conditionality will continue to apply as appropriate. There was also a number of queries in relation to people who work part-time or casually and who are now employed because of COVID-19. I want to confirm that those workers will be entitled to the COVID emergency payment. Likewise, if you are self-employed, you are also entitled to it. Other deputies raised points regarding eligibility if you are already in receipt of a social welfare payment. And just to be clear on this, if you are working and were also in receipt of social welfare payments such as carers payment, working family payment, or one-parent family payment or the Rural Social Scheme, you can, provided you have lost your job due to COVID-19, also claim the COVID-19 emergency payment in addition to retaining your existing welfare payment. The COVID-19 unemployment payment will replace your employment income and will be regarded by the Department as equivalent to employment income. And I know a number of queries were also raised in relation to people who have already applied for or who are already in receipt of the 203 rate of payment. And just to be clear, if you have already applied before the 24th of March or are already in receipt of the pandemic unemployment payment, you do not need to do anything. Your next payment will be paid at the increased rate. Just to say, this is a solidarity payment, and if people are defrauding your fellow citizens by claiming dishonestly, the full force of the law will be applied, and DESP will investigate potential fraud situations as they come to their attention. And a number of deputies have also raised the issue of frontier workers, and that's something I'm very familiar with, obviously coming or living in County Monaghan, where you have people working in the south of the border and living in Northern Ireland. And just to say that we are looking at that situation currently. And I just also, there's a number of other issues that were raised, but I'll be happy to discuss any further aspects on the social protection measures later. Just in terms of housing, I know many deputies have spoken on the housing measures in the bill, and I think it's important to say that this is an emergency bill to cover a period of an extraordinary national emergency. And the bill is not intended as a means to introduce new legislation to address wider issues across the housing sector. Such measures could prove counterproductive and could, after the emergency is over, lead to a decline in the availability of particular forms of accommodation. The Government is acutely conscious of the financial pressures on renters, and actions taken to date will ensure that people will remain living in their homes for the duration of the COVID-19 emergency. The Government would urge landlords and tenants to work together to ensure the best solutions during this emergency are found. The Government is also very conscious of the need to protect vulnerable people, and the local authority sector is working with the Department of Housing to secure additional accommodation, including across our homeless services. And Minister Damien English will discuss these and other aspects in relation to the housing section of the bill in further detail at committee stage later on. So just to say, it is hard to believe that just a few short weeks ago Ireland was at full employment with record numbers at work. Practically overnight, the economic and employment landscape in our country has been utterly transformed by COVID-19. We are in a crisis that is unprecedented in the history of the state. First and foremost, the Government is focused on responding to the public health emergency that we face, and that is our overriding priority. But we are also acutely aware of the huge economic challenges that Ireland is now facing. And I know that this is an extremely worrying and distressing time for the many businesses who have had to close their doors and the thousands of workers who have lost their jobs. These are difficult days, but COVID-19 will not last forever. It will end, and we must be ready when it does. And that is why, through the wage subsidy scheme, we want to ensure that businesses are able to keep their employees on the books, so that when we come out the other side of this, Ireland and our citizens can get back to work as quickly as possible. By maintaining that crucial link between the employer and the employee, we will be best placed to kick-start the economy once again. Essentially, through this scheme, the Government is entering into an economic partnership with businesses and employers nationwide, so that we can support them and their staff through this unprecedented crisis. So I would encourage those employers who may have let staff go last week to look now at this scheme and consider, where possible, taking those staff back on and availing of the supports available. At the end of the day, businesses will want to keep their good, dedicated, loyal staff and have them ready to go once this crisis has passed. And I know a number of deputies have raised issues regarding supports for businesses, so I'm just going to go through them very briefly. The €200 million working capital loan scheme, which is open for applications on the SBCI website, and there's loans of up to €500,000. They can be unsecured, and businesses can opt to repay interest only at the start of the loan. Loans of up to €50,000 through Microfinance Ireland with no interest or repayments for the first 6 months. So that can be used as a liquidity instrument to deal with cash flow problems with no interest charge for 6 months. And we will continue to review this as necessary. So what you really have there is 6 months free credit, and you can apply through the local enterprise office. The credit guarantee scheme with loans of up to €1 million is available, including the option of refinancing existing loans. The local enterprise offices in every single county are offering vouchers from €2,500 to €10,000 to support businesses be prepared. Commercial rates can be deferred for 3 months. The banks have signed up to a number of measures to support businesses with loan and mortgage forbearance for 3 months. And Minister Donoghue has also announced a number of measures through revenue to help SMEs experiencing cash flow problems. And we have also extended the deadline for companies to file their annual returns with the Companies Registration Office until the end of June. All of these measures will come at a huge cost, but we hope that by acting now, that will mean that in the long run we will have less people falling into unemployment, so that our economy can recover as quickly as possible. As I see it, there are 3 stages that businesses will need to be supported through this crisis: the initial shock, stabilisation, and when the public health emergency has passed, the reboot phase. When you see a report from the ESRI this morning, which predicts that unemployment could reach 18%, that tells you why, at this point, our focus must be on stabilisation and protecting key sectors of the economy. And my officials are engaging with the Department of Finance and with the European Commission, and I can assure deputies that there will be further supports forthcoming. What I want to ensure is that we have the right support for businesses at the right time. In terms of the supply chain, I have been in constant contact with the retail and grocery distribution sector, who continue to assure me that we have strong pipeline of products for our citizens. And I really want to thank once again the countless retail staff who are working around the clock to ensure that our supermarket shelves remain full during this difficult period. I want to thank the many people working behind the scenes to make that possible: the farmers, the producers, the hauliers, the palleting, the logistics companies, the people who work in the ports, the ferry companies, as well as staff in the pharma, the medtech sectors, and indeed many more. These are frontline staff who are putting their shoulder to the wheel and contributing to the national effort. And just to say that all of these schemes may not be perfect, Cathaoirleach, and there will be flaws. But that's what happens when legislation is drawn up in the space of a few days, as opposed to over the course of many months, as would normally happen. But as Michael Ryan from the World Health Organization said recently, when you're in a crisis, speed trumps perfection. What the government is doing here is a genuine attempt to support all of our businesses and citizens and ensure that they get the right support. And I do want to acknowledge, Cathaoirleach, the support and the cooperation of all sides of the Oireachtas at this time. This is a collective national effort, and I want to thank you all for that.
Thank you, Minister.